Molinism is the doctrine of providence that was developed by the 16th century theologian Luis Molina in order to afford a reconciliation of divine sovereignty and human freedom. Now, how did this reconciliation work? Well, it hinges upon Molina's doctrine of God's so-called middle knowledge. Now, in order to understand this, you have to grasp that Molina differentiated three logical stages in God's knowledge. These are not chronologically ordered. That's important to understand, but they are logically ordered. One is logically prior to the next. So the first moment of divine knowledge, Molina called God's natural knowledge. The content of this knowledge is essential to God. He could not have lacked this knowledge. It would be God's knowledge of all necessary truths, including all of the possible worlds that lay within his power to actualize. The next moment of God's knowledge, Molina called God's middle knowledge, and he gave it that name because it lies in between the other two types of knowledge. So it's called middle knowledge. And this is God's knowledge of all of the true subjunctive conditionals about how any free agent would freely choose in any circumstances that God might put him in. Now, in order to understand this middle knowledge, it's really important that our listeners understand the difference between indicative hypotheticals or conditionals and subjunctive conditionals or hypotheticals. We native English speakers aren't very good at using the subjunctive mood, and yet it's really critically different from the indicative mood. To give an illustration, think of the indicative conditional. If Oswald didn't shoot John Kennedy, somebody else did. Now that's evidently true because Kennedy was assassinated. So if Oswald didn't kill Kennedy, somebody did. But now consider the subjunctive conditional. If Oswald hadn't shot Kennedy, somebody else would have. That is not at all obviously true. The only people who believe that are the conspiracy theorists who think that there may have been another shooter on the grassy knoll, for example. So in this second moment of God's knowledge, what God knows is all of these subjunctive conditionals about how any possible person God might create would freely behave in any circumstances in which God might place him. So that's middle knowledge. Then following middle knowledge is the divine decree of a world that God wants to be the actual world. Of the various worlds that are feasible to him based upon his middle knowledge, God selects one to be real, and he decrees that that will be the actual world. And then following the divine decree, God has the third type of knowledge, which is called free knowledge, and that is God's knowledge of the actual world, past, present, and future. So in this way, divine foreknowledge just falls out automatically as a result of God's knowledge of his own divine decree and his middle knowledge. And this affords God providential control over a world of free creatures. By knowing exactly how free creatures would behave in any circumstances, God, by selecting just those circumstances and just those creatures and placing them in them, can be assured that they will do exactly what he wills for them to do, so that everything that happens is under the sovereign providential control of God. And yet, this is not determinism. God knows how creatures would freely choose in any circumstance. So he simply decrees to put the people in the relevant circumstances, and then he takes hands off and he just lets them make their choices. But they cannot escape his middle knowledge of knowing how they would freely choose. And so God can plan the world in such a way that everything is under his providential control, but without abridging or annihilating human freedom. So that's the theory in a nutshell. I hope that's clear.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. See you next time. God bless.